watching Middle East Matters and a very warm welcome to you. Our roundup from the region this week includes a rare deal with the Syrian regime leads to the release of a group of nuns held captive by rebels for over 3 months. But the move does little to allay the Christian minority's fears over what could happen to them in a post-Assad Syria. Charity groups turn to shock tactics to try and stir sympathy for children caught in the conflict, as NGOs publish ever more horrifying facts on the 3rd anniversary of the Syrian uprising. And war has been declared on Iraq by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, or at least that's what Iraq's Prime Minister tells France 24's Mark Perlman. Mark will be here to give us the behind-the-scenes insight into that interview. But we're going to start in Syria, where a group of nuns have been freed after being held hostage for 3 months by rebels from the radical al-Nusra Front. Their release comes as part of a prisoner swap with the Syrian regime. The nuns were taken captive last December in the Christian town of Malula. Christians make up just 10% of the population, a minority that fears it could be at grave risk should a radically Muslim rebel group take control. Claire Williams explains.
Rocky and barren, Wadi al-Nazra, the Valley of Christians, once saw 2 million pilgrims a year before war broke out. It's now militiamen, mostly Christians, who surround the statue of Christ, perched 2,000 metres high on Mount Cherub.
In the valley, they destroyed our churches, broke statues of the Virgin Mary, threatened to force us to leave Syria.
In the last 6 months, the valley has transformed into a battleground for army soldiers and radical Islamists. These images were filmed in the midst of fighting in Malula last September. The city's residents speak Aramaic, said to be the language of Jesus Christ. Syria's Christians initially distanced themselves from the conflict, preferring not to take sides. Now most have lent their support to the regime, hoping their security and religious freedoms will be better protected. Last year, these militiamen were craftsmen and lawyers. Now they're fighting alongside Bashar al-Assad's soldiers to safeguard Sednaya, a sacred city for Christians known as Syria's Vatican. Security cameras have been installed at all entry points. The regime supplies the militia groups with arms. Some of them carried out their military training in Russia.
Our enemies are on the other side of the valley. They're carrying out raids and more kidnappings. When we can, we shoot them down.
They patrol 24 hours a day in the hopes that Naya's residents won't have to join the growing ranks of Syrian refugees.
I'm Muslim and I live with Christians. We live in harmony.
This city, it's ours. We must defend it. If we let Sednaya go, we'll have to leave Syria.
It's a support base for Bashar al-Assad that's merely circumstantial. Faced with threats and kidnappings by Islamist militants, many Christians feel they have little choice but to back the regime.
Well, as the 3rd anniversary approaches, new reports from NGOs like this one from Save the Children have been published. In it, horrifying facts. Over 1 million children displaced, thousands of them killed. What's more, it continues 60% of Syria's hospitals have been destroyed or badly damaged as a result. Children are also dying of treatable illnesses and, of course, suffering from the terrible trauma. The horror and its extent has been recognised worldwide, and yet nothing is being done, and even generating a humanitarian response is calling for shock tactics. Nicholas Rushworth reports.
The Syrian conflict enters its 4th year this week. Among the 140,000 dead, children. The UN says more than 10,000. At least 1.2 million Syrian children are now refugees. Here at the Zatari camp in neighbouring Jordan, the youngest Syrian survivors are suffering from experiencing extreme violence.
Children who are 4.5 to 5 years of age have memories of what happened to them in Syria. Children were frightened. When we approach, they pull back. Whereas children of 3.5 years old, with no memories from Syria, are friendly and social. They're not afraid or scared.
NGOs say raising donations for them requires shock tactics. This Save the Children video posted on YouTube shows a London girl enduring bombing and evacuation over the space of a year, from one birthday to the next. The video is a success. It has been watched by more than 20 million people worldwide since being posted on the 5th of March. Another video, this time by the NGO SOS Children's Villages. It asks, would you give your jacket to the boy freezing of cold? A hidden camera filmed people at an Oslo bus stop, part of a campaign to send coats and blankets to Syria. The United Nations says 4.3 million Syrian children need humanitarian help. Survivors of civil war, they lack basic medical care. The country's health system has been devastated.
Well, blaming a spillover from Syria for the recent upsurge in violence in his own country, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki says Saudi Arabia and Qatar have declared war on Iraq.
They are attacking Iraq through Syria indirectly. They absolutely stated a war on Iraq, like they stated a war on Syria. Those countries are concerned that Iraq would become strong again, because Iraq has all the elements needed to become strong again. This is why they are mobilizing and spend lots of money and all possible means to weaken Iraq. The religious, terrorist, security crisis, this crisis is due to those two countries, first and foremost.
Well, those harsh words there coming in an interview with France 24's Mark Perlman. And Mark joins us now in studio. Mark, al-Maliki, they're really pointing a very serious finger of blame. Why now?
That's a good question. We know that for months he's been complaining about foreign powers meddling in Syria and in Iraq, but he had never named and shamed them. He did so in that interview, probably because he has some evidence of that meddling, of that support for rebel groups and terrorist groups, but also because there are upcoming elections in Iraq, important one, the first ones since the US troop withdrawal. They're scheduled for April 30th, and he wants to show that he's a strong leader and there's nothing better than rallying around the flag, and he's hoping to get those votes, probably by attacking others.
Indeed, those elections are coming faster and faster, and yet we've seen a pretty serious upsurge in violence in the last year in Iraq. They say it's gone back to 2007 levels.
Yes, absolutely. When we were there, bombs were getting off all the time. There are nearly 1,000 dead per month in Iraq. That's huge, and it's probably not going to diminish until those elections, because there are lots of tensions between the Shiites, the Sunnis, even between those confessions themselves, parties trying to gain the upper hand, and sometimes it leads to violence. And of course, the war in neighboring Syria making matters worse, because we see lots of weapons and militants coming from Syria into Iraq. So you're going to probably see lots of more car bombs and lots of more death in the coming weeks in Iraq.
So then a very tense situation when you interviewed the Prime Minister there, Mark.
Yes, very tight security measures had to be taken in a very tense environment, even though you're interviewing him inside the Green Zone, which is much safer than the rest of Baghdad.
Well, Mark, thanks again for that interview and indeed joining us here in studio. Well, finally, we're going to take a tour of Hebron in the Palestinian territories. Our main tour guide, an Israeli former soldier who, since he finished service, has started showing people what he sees as the reality of Israel's presence there. Whether or not Israel should stay or go proves a hot topic for debate among tourists and locals alike. Gallagher Fenwick reports.
While Middle East peace talks seem bogged down, the debate remains passionate between Israelis who want their country out of the West Bank and those who want to maintain a Jewish presence there. Hebron is perhaps where arguments can get most heated. Some 180,000 Palestinians live under the watchful eyes of hundreds of IDF soldiers. One of their missions is to protect 850 settlers who moved here. David Wilder is their spokesman.
This is a particularly holy book.
He refers to the West Bank by its biblical name, Judea and Samaria.
Of course, we believe that Jews should remain here. We believe that all of the land in Judea and Samaria, particularly a place like Hebron, should be annexed by the State of Israel.
Yehuda Shaul has made a name for himself by being one of those Israelis who campaign publicly against their country's military occupation of the West Bank. These streets, which Palestinian vendors have been expelled from, is where the activist once served as a soldier and where he now recounts what he did at the time. He says that, as a grenade machine gun operator, he was ordered to shoot towards Palestinian homes nearby.
It is insane. But I aimed to the area of the target and pulled the trigger and leave it as fast as I could and just sprayed that the less amount of grenades were fired. Because if you pull the trigger for a minute, 88 grenades are out. It's a very massive machine gun.
Soldiers, settlers, and others in Hebron know Yehuda very well and often gather around him, at times to oppose his views.
Not army posts. To my knowledge, no Israeli soldier ever indiscriminately fired on Arab people intentionally with intent to kill them.
Jewish people think like me. Sadly, those who oppose us have power. They have media support. There have always been dishonest people around. Yehuda Shaul is not the first of them to come here.
Among the Israelis who joined the tour, Esti feels that this experience confirmed her original feelings about this thorny issue.
I do believe that the idea of people being here and imposing their presence on another people just because they believe historically that they should be here and making people's lives difficult, I don't understand, and it's something I have a hard time with.
As the tour comes to an end, Yehuda warns of the perils which he believes Israel will face if it does not change its policies in the area.
We need to take a decision. Either we live with Israel, in Israel, with legitimacy, without the occupation, or we continue with the occupation and we lose the state of Israel entirely.
Yehuda and those who think like him know that, in this debate, their opponents,
I guess you know there's other side to the story, and
currently have the upper hand in Israel's government.
Well, that's it for Middle East Matters for this week. Don't forget, you can catch it all again on our website, france24.com, and indeed look up the full version of that interview with the Iraqi Prime Minister. Until next time, take care.